Half the locals call it Russell, the other half call it Kororāreka. And today I'm in Whangārei. Whangārei. Can they not make up their minds? Parahaki. I mean, seriously, people. What does it matter? Actually, it matters, and it matters a lot. And I'll tell you why. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half of the Breakaway Bravehearts. Things in New Zealand are changing, and it's stirring up some big emotions. I've been away for over a decade, and I've been surprised at just how much has changed. Even the names of places that I was once familiar with, I'm now having to relearn them. Since I left in 2013, 50 to 60 different places have had their official names changed to either restore their original Māori name or correct misspellings or mispronunciations. And it's making headlines. This is a historical current event? Wait, a current event of history? Sounds like an oxymoron. You see, all this land has a backstory, and it's one that really matters. It's part of the whakapapa, or genealogy, of the people of the land. We're going to be looking at the work of the New Zealand Geographic Board, or NZGB for short. They're the crew that since 1946 have been making place names in New Zealand official. Before they came on the scene, things were a bit of a mess. Places had different names on different maps, and then what folks actually called the place was different again. In fact, it was so much of a mess that now, 2025, there is only 10 to 15% of the names that have been officially corrected. The rest are just listed as recorded. That means they're what we're going to put on the map, but they haven't actually been approved just yet. This isn't just about updating some road signs. This is about confronting history that's been hidden for a while. It's about bringing about voices that were silenced. So picture this, you're standing in one of New Zealand's most picturesque and popular tourist sites. Half the locals call it Russell, the other half call it Kororāreka. Can they not make up their minds? The original name of this gorgeous little harbour is Kororāreka. And it comes from a story about penguin soup. A local chief was feeling unwell, and somebody made him penguin soup for medicinal purposes. And he declared it was Kororāreka, sweet and delicious. But then the white folk came, and Kororāreka became overrun with whaling ships and unruly soldiers and sailors and, mostly just drunk people. The town gained a very poor reputation, and local Māori actually called in for the British government to come and control their people. The coastline had become a haven for all different kinds of people. Some legit traders, some slightly dodgy people just looking to make a quick buck away from the British law, and some very dodgy people who were actually escaped convicts from Australia. By the 1830s, the town had earned the nickname the hellhole of the Pacific. Appalled missionaries called it a moral wasteland. Hopefully not something you'll see on the tourist reviews today. First, the British government sent over James Busby, but he was more of a diplomatic presence. He didn't have any military power. Without any physical threat, the misfits didn't really feel like they needed to follow British law. I mean, that's why they'd come here in the first place. Busby tried all sorts of diplomatic ways to bring law and order, including drafting a declaration of independence with the local Māori tribes. But it just didn't bring control to those unruly Brits. So the locals thought they would have to take matters into their own hands, and they formed a vigilante group which required everybody to carry a firearm. This wasn't much help. Māori had wanted structure, law and order, and instead they had ended up with an uncontrolled European settlement that was now running around with weapons. Eventually, Lieutenant Governor William Hobson arrived. He had one job. He was tasked by the Queen Victoria, to set up a proper colony in New Zealand. So he presented to Māori chiefs a treaty, a promise that would protect everyone from each other. Many Māori saw the treaty as a bit of a breakthrough. Now the British government were going to really have some decent control over their own wayward white folk. and the Māori could govern themselves. They got a lot more control than what they originally bargained for. You can probably guess from the tone of my voice that this didn't end well. So I'm going to go into more depth around the treaty and what happened there, because it is a long, very interesting but kind of complicated story. So make sure you hit subscribe and the notifications bell to join me for that one too. But back to this story. You see, at the time the treaty was written, Kororāreka was the biggest European settlement, so it kind of made sense for the capital to be here. But of course it had that terrible reputation. So Hobson actually decided to try a place about 5 kilometres up the road. Here, Aotearoa, and this area eventually became known as Russell, named after a British Prime Minister, a man Queen Victoria once called selfish, vain, imprudent, reckless and impulsive. When Britain decided to colonise the land, they wanted to make the names a little bit more attractive to European tongues. So most of them were altered and many just simply replaced. You've probably heard of cities like Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington. These all echo our British heritage, not our Indigenous one. Even the name of our country isn't really its name. It was given to us by Dutch explorers who wanted to celebrate Abel Tasman, and it's named after Zeeland coastal area in the Netherlands. Our country's real name is Aotearoa. This name was given by the person who originally found this land, Kupe. This great Polynesian explorer had left Hawaii with his crew searching for lands that would hold more promise for their future. They journeyed out across the ocean, and finally his wife, or some say his daughter, pointed to the sky and called out, "He ao, he ao, a cloud, a cloud." The sign of a cloud in the skyline showed Polynesian navigators that a coastline was near. So Kupe named the land Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. It's a beautiful name and I wish we'd use it more. It is now on our passports, which is fabulous, but internationally we are still legally known as New Zealand. You see, while the name Aotearoa is embraced locally and it's used quite often in our government, it's actually not quite legal in terms of its status internationally, and its status is still a little bit complex and still stirs up a lot of emotion. Most recently, a members' bill was presented to Parliament saying that only the word New Zealand should be used in documents because it would confuse people internationally. There's been a lot of ongoing debate and petitions both for and against the name change, and a lot of this actually reflects both political and generational divides within our community. In fact, support for the name change has been dropping recently. A 2024 Research New Zealand poll found that only 8% supported using Aotearoa on its own, and a strong 66% majority wanted just New Zealand. So government has been cautious about moving forward with a full legal name change, not wanting to upset people or confuse the map makers or the tourists booking their flights. Of course, while they've been arguing about it, Rhodesia has become Zimbabwe, Burma became Myanmar, the Czech Republic became Czechia, Swaziland became Eswatini, and Holland became Netherlands, just to name a few examples. What do you think? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, back in 1840, the newly named capital of Russell proved as poorly suited for leadership as its namesake, and Hobson moved his capital to Auckland. None of this impressed the locals. Aotearoa became known as Old Russell and quickly faded into obscurity. But over the years, things shifted again, and Kororāreka became the town of Russell, and Aotearoa went back to using its original name. But the people of Kororāreka have not found it so easy to turn back time. Back in 2021, a proposal was put in with 3 different options. We could either just outright rename it Kororāreka, we could have a dual name, Kororāreka Russell, or we could use both names with equal billing. The board actually decided on outright changing the name to Kororāreka, and they sent this to the Minister of Land Information for approval, because big controversial name changes have to be approved by the government. But that minister stalled on making a decision, and then got kicked out when there was an election. A new government took place, a new minister came in, and he announced in late 2024 that Kororāreka Russell was on the list of declined proposals. Deb Rawere, who's the chair of the Kororāreka Marae Society, told Radio New Zealand that she is sorely disappointed and kind of baffled because most public submissions actually supported the name change. Even opponents said they don't mind using Kororāreka, they just prefer to have the dual option. Personally, I think if they're not going to just change the name outright, they could at the very least go with a dual name. Like our North Island, Te Ika-A-Maui, and Te Waipounamu, which is the name of our South Island. For most of our history, our two main islands have been known simply and slightly uncreatively as the North and South Islands. But then in 2009, the NZGB discovered that these names had never actually officially been registered. So this prompted national consultation as people tried to work out, okay, what do we do now? Do we stick with that? Or is there room to move? Well, yes, turns out there is. First stop, iwi. What are the actual names of these islands? Te Ika-A-Maui means the fish of Maui. According to Māori tradition, a demigod named Maui, yes, he sounds familiar, you may have heard of him from Moana, he fished up the North Island using his magic hook. You can kind of see it, right? The shape of the island. Some stories have the South Island as his waka, his canoe, but its name is actually Te Waipounamu, or waters of greenstone. The rivers and lakes of the South Island are full of pounamu, and this beautiful rock used to be used for weapons and ornaments, and now you'll see it as jewellery. So after all the consultation, the Minister for Land Information of the time, Maurice Williamson, approved a dual naming system. And in 2013, both islands were officially given both Māori and English names. They are legally optional alternatives that can be used interchangeably. You don't have to use either one or the other, and you don't have to use them together. And neither one holds priority. The idea is inclusivity. It acknowledges the official status of Te Reo Māori as a language of New Zealand, and it acknowledges our dual heritage, our blended cultural history. So most people thought the same system could easily apply to Russell, which would gradually shift back to Kororāreka. And sadly, that fight still continues. Here we are in 2025, and the New Zealand Geographic Board has recently announced that the name change proposal has been declined. One of the reasons cited for declining the name change is it's too hard to pronounce. Okay, it's a little bit tricky if you've not spoken Māori before, but come on. Everybody needs to give it a go. It's a beautiful name. And if you're concerned about tourists and travellers struggling with it, I think you'll find that most of them are at least bilingual already and can cope with a little bit of pronunciation challenge. And at this point, I'm not going to argue with you. I struggle a lot with some of the Māori words. And that's really sad because I've lived in this country, was born in this country, was raised in this country, and I still can't get the pronunciation correct. Sadly for me, I learnt Japanese before I learnt Te Reo Māori, so a lot of my Māori words come out sounding like a Japanese tourist. But that's okay. You've got to give it a shot, right? And you've got to keep trying, keep practicing. If there's anyone who can give us some hints on how to get our tongues around some of those R's and some of the, especially the vowels, I struggle with those, please leave me some hints, some tips in the comment section below, so we can all benefit. And just a note here too, the NZGB, the website is fantastic for giving you a little audio so you can hear the correct pronunciation. Check it out.
Whangārei Harbour.
Most travellers I know want to show respect for the land that they're visiting, and they're quite happy to just attempt and try and learn how to say names correctly. They've managed to cope with all the other Māori names. The second reason given was it was too expensive, spending all that money on changing the signs and whatnot. Well, considering since election the new government has just spent 108 million on refurbishing their offices, I think this argument is also a little bit... The disappointment is even more surprising when you find out that other places have been successful in getting their names changed, despite the cost or how hard they might be to say. For example, when I was a kid, everybody called this city behind me Whangārei, and then they started to correct themselves to Whangārei, and now it has been absolutely corrected to Whangārei with an emphasis and macron on the A. And this beautiful name is linked to the story of two twin sisters caught in an unhealthy love triangle. Rei Pai and they too were twin sisters from the Waikato region, known for their beauty with their stunning auburn hair and their beautiful green eyes. A chief called Ue from the Northland came down to visit the tribe under peaceful tribal negotiations. He met the two sisters and a bond between the three of them formed almost instantly. They were great friends, and Ue decided he wanted to take one home with him as his wife, but he couldn't decide which one, and things became a little awkward. He returned home on his own and asked a friend to help him out. He commissioned a warrior falcon to go back and collect the girls. When the warrior falcon got there, the girls knew this was a message, but they couldn't decide who the message was actually for, and a bit of an argument broke out. In the end, they decided they would both return, and so they jumped on the back of the warrior falcon, and off the falcon flew. But the sisters still couldn't stop bickering, and throughout the whole flight, it got worse and worse. Insults were thrown, and it got quite unpleasant. There's a bit of debate as to exactly who said what, but the story goes that they too started body shaming her sister, saying to the falcon how sorry she felt for this poor bird having to carry her heavy sister Rei Pai. Understandably, Rei Pai was a little bit miffed about this, and so she asked just to be let down to take a bit of a break. The falcon stopped at a beach and Rei Pai got off and gave herself a bit of space. But once she got off, she could hear Rei Tu continuing to badmouth her behind her back. She refused to get back on again, and she decided to stay on that beach, naming it One Rahi, the place of overhearing. It was a good move. She was rewarded for standing up for herself, because it was here that she met the real love of her life, a local chief. And eventually she became the ancestor of the local people here, hence the name Te Whangārei Pai, or the harbour of Rei Pai, or for short, Whangārei. And that's why it matters, because it's not just a beautiful story, a fascinating legend, it's whakapapa, it's genealogy, it is the history of the people of the land. And we want to get it right. My white folk colonist ancestors would be upset if the towns named after their famous people were spelt incorrectly, so we've got to get it right for Māori too. And that goes for Parihaka, where we are today, which is definitely not Parahaki or anything else. Once you get to the summit, there's a really great explanation of how this mountain got its name. During the time when the people lived here on their pa, there were a lot of tribal skirmishes. This was a key piece of land, strategic in its outlook, so everybody wanted to be up here. But the pa was very well defended. Not only was it on this steep hillside with a great outlook, but they had built, using earthworks, some terraces or pārenga around the pa, which gave them this extra sort of edge against defenders coming up. But one day they were maybe a little overconfident, a little too bold in their defence, and they went out onto the pārenga and they performed their haka. You know that dance, as it's called internationally, the Māori war dance, the haka, that a lot of people might have seen in the rugby? Well, the tribe here decided to perform the haka out on the pārenga, and that way they could make sure the enemy saw it as they hurled insults and derisions, etc. It was a bold move, and so the name comes from that event, a haka performed on the parihaka. but they may have pushed their enemy just a little bit too far, because in retaliation they set the pā on fire. There was a lot of deaths, and this ground had to become tapu, sacred, meaning you could not return here. Unless, of course, you were a colonist and didn't care about such things. More on that. You see, over time the name got twisted, mispronounced, and turned into Parahaki, which ended up on most of the European maps. The push to change the name back to Parihaka began in 1937, when local iwi, or tribes, went to the city council and requested the correction. They were declined, but they kept going. They were declined again. They kept going, and finally in 2003 they were recognised. But then it didn't come into effect until 2005. That's 68 years. I mean, seriously, people. But not everyone was happy about it. One local politician said it was political correctness gone mad. She did a poll, and she said out of the 2,500 people she polled, 94% disagreed with the name change. Therefore, the public do not want it. I've worked in political circles, and from my experience, it's pretty easy to manipulate and create the stats to say what you want them to say. For Māori, this is more than just a slight insult. It's deeply hurtful. Many elders felt a deep sense of loss whenever they heard the name mispronounced. I mean, it's like the world just didn't care about their history, about the things that were important to them. So that's why when this mountain finally got its name back, hundreds of people turned up to celebrate, and a special commemorative monument was commissioned. This carved kohatu, created by master carver Te Aotearoa, symbolises the very spirit of the mountain itself, through a design that mimics the parapets of the pā that once stood here. So as the mayor of the time said, Cheryl Mai, it's an affirmation of mana. Some people translate mana as power in English. Some people will tell you it's more like status, and others will say it's spirit. But really, it's a Māori concept that combines all three. It's a deeply layered concept, which I won't pretend to fully understand, but it seems to combine physical prestige with spirituality. And it's not necessarily something that you can inherit or that is automatically granted to you through your rank. It has to be earned through deeds, or it's given to you, bestowed upon you by some kind of collective recognition of who you are. And it doesn't just apply to people, it can apply to places, to rivers, to mountains. The mana of Parihaka comes from its ancestral significance, from the respect that it has enduringly held over generations. So by restoring its name, we honour its mana. And the best part, the lookout is open to everyone, so we can all come up here and enjoy this fabulous piece of New Zealand history and nature. But that's not the end of the story. Not even in little old Whangārei, there's still a lot more names to be changed. Hātea River, for example, is apparently supposed to be Aotearoa River. That is the river's name, so it should be what we're using. It makes sense to me. If we're going to start honouring Māori names and stories, we need to continue and be thorough about it. But there's no doubt that changing the name of a place creates some strong feelings on both sides. And we've got a lot of examples of that here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Mount Taranaki, one of Aotearoa's most iconic peaks, was called Mount Egmont for centuries after Captain Cook named it after a British lord. For a long time there was public resistance to changing the name, but finally in 1986 it got the dual name Taranaki Egmont, and now it has been officially recognised as Taranaki Maunga. And get this, it's even legally recorded as a person. It has the legal status of a human being, but it still uses the pronoun it. Taranaki Maunga is seen as a legal person because it is a living entity with rights, responsibilities and guardians who speak on its behalf. This is recognition of a Māori worldview. It's an attempt to start officially recognising Māori perspectives in our national law, which has always been based on British values. So it's something we should all know about and all have our say in. If you want to raise your voice, the NZGB encourages it through their website. Anyone can have their say, whether you support or object to a name change. I've put their link in the description below. And you know what? These guys even have a say in the naming of Antarctica. Yeah, that's right. I always thought that was international territory, but it turns out New Zealand has an area of responsibility, the Ross Dependency. And so we get to choose the names for those places there, which means you get to have a say in that too. There are deadlines around the submission, so I encourage you to check the website and keep going back to it. Because if you care about a place, you should care about the way we name it, and you should make your voice heard. And I want to thank you for listening to my voice. I really enjoyed putting this video together for you. I'm going to be making other videos that are deep dives into living history, the current events of history. Find me a better phrase. I guess I just mean history that's still unfolding around us, current events that are part of an ongoing historical story. I really hope you'll join me for more of these deep dives. Until then, please don't forget to hit the notifications bell and the subscribe, and please share this video with others you think might enjoy it too. I love my community. You mean a lot to me, so keep commenting as well, because I really want that engagement with you. But until I see you next time, happy travels everyone.